The corridors, offices, antechambers, and once filled meeting rooms now stand silent, having been evacuated. How many of you have ever known somebody who, for a long time, wasn't doing well financially, but they lived well off of credit cards and they kept the appearances up? People looked on from the outside and said, well, it seems like they're doing all right, but their finances behind the scenes were terrible. And eventually, the day came when all of a sudden there were garage sales and there were people knocking on the door and for sale signs in the front yard. And everything fell apart. Well, that's where we're at. You see, for a long time in this country, people thought that everything was fine. They looked around and there was no outward signs of problem, but it was building. And I'm sure a lot of you know what I'm talking about. Well, our day has arrived. There's a for sale sign in the front yard. And there are people knocking on the door. But those responsible saw it coming. And they made provision. And they lined up and boarded the C-130s and headed off into the sunset, having made another place to go, leaving many of us to hold the bag and suffer the consequences of what's going to come. Hopefully we can be prepared. You see, the advent of AI was not to be. We revealed in a video about a week ago that all AI is a bunch of low-paid, stoned employees on the West Coast sitting around telling a computer what to think and how to act. Well, together, they made a plan. And now the plan has hatched. And this is the result of all of that planning and all of that scheming. Now, in today's video, we're going to cover all this. But once again, I want to say thank you to everyone who has continued to file in over at the Florida Maquis Patreon channel, where for 3/4 a dime, 2 nickels, and 5 pennies per month, you can have access to gloves off content that Google itself can't see. Why? We can partner with Vimeo. It's a private server where you have to purchase space, and I purchased the space knowing this day was going to come, that we were going to have to talk about things in a way that you couldn't talk about them in public. I can take those videos, put them at Patreon, but they do have to have a speed bump. A lot of people talk about BitChute or Rumble. There's no speed bumps there. There's no speed bumps there. Google can see all of that. Their AI can peer into all of that. They can't see Vimeo. Would love to have you over there. $1 per month, even less if you sign up for an entire year. Basically meaning if you sign up for an entire year, you can take the dime off each month. It comes out to 90 cents a month. There's a $5 level over there. It's not required. People were asking if they could contribute a little more, and so I set up a level to make that a little bit easier. But once again, we are facing something that this country has never faced before. We showed where they're going. These elitists that have destroyed our country, they're going to this massive, sprawling compound in Lebanon. 2.5 times, not the size of the White House, 2.5 times the size of the land the White House sits on. State of the art. With everything they would need to govern from halfway across the world. Because when things fall apart, there are going to be riots, there's going to be anarchy, because the checks are going to stop showing up in your bank account. Those of you with direct deposit, those of you getting a government check, the 2/3 of America. Wait, what, Florida Maquis? That's right. 2/3 of America live in households where every month a government check shows up to support it. Whether it's Social Security, whether it's child tax credits, whether it's some other thing, whether it's a military, 2/3 of America may not see checks in only a couple of months. Now, yesterday I had mentioned about Bible prophecy. And very few people picked up on it down in the comments. I thought a lot more would. Isaiah 10:34, and he shall cut down the thickets of the forest with iron, and Lebanon shall fall by a mighty one. Now, a couple of different translations of the Bible add in the word iron axe. That's not what the King James says. Cut down the thickets of forest with iron. How many remember the story that went around the 18th century that the original dense forests of North America were so prolific that a squirrel could hop up a tree on the Atlantic Ocean and not touch the ground until he reached the Mississippi? That's how thick the forests were. Now, when it says cut down with iron, there's only one thing that, to my mind, can possibly have meant: the iron horse and the iron rails. Far more trees were cleared, making way for the railroads than for just houses or for structures, especially at the beginning of this country and pushing the Native Americans out of the way. We're going to show some images a little bit later on. I'll warn you, we're going to disturb you. But it goes to another Bible prophecy that I think many have misinterpreted. The iron horse. The biggest railroad companies. This was the hallmark of North America. When this happened, this is truly when the world changed. This was the first somewhat crude internet of its time. When these rail lines all started to branch out and infiltrate the West and the North and the East and the South, that's when the wealth really started to build and the greed in this country really started to build. And there's one place when you look at this map that you can see the blue, the orange, the tan, the green, and the pink all meet. And they all meet right here. Something else we need to talk about. See, this is going to be critical when this country falls, because all this is going to come to a screeching halt. And when that happens, we're going to hear this. We remember the fish, which we did eat in Egypt, freely the cucumbers, the melons, and the leeks, and the onions, and the garlic. This is, of course, the Israelites complaining after they had been delivered from Egypt, and they were on their way to the promised land. They started to complain and murmur amongst themselves. Now, in this scripture, they talk about the onions and the garlic. I'm sure a lot of you know this little area that I circled. This is Chicago, of course. This is the tip of Lake Michigan. This is Chicago. The word Chicago comes from the Native American word Chicago, which means wild garlic and onions. I kid you not. That is exactly what it means. Look it up. This is Bible prophecy. This is going to be the hallmark of people yearning for a time long ago, like MAGA, for example. Make America Great Again. The nostalgia idea of, I want to go back to the way things were in Egypt, just like the Israelites did. Now, some are going to probably say, Florimaki, they're not going to let the debt ceiling go unraised. They're not going to let all this happen. U.S. debt ceiling deadlock devastating London. I'm sure a lot of you have read this and have read over the details of what would happen if they didn't raise the debt ceiling. Very serious threat to the global economy. Quote, it would be absolutely devastating if America, which is one of the biggest motors of the global economy, was to have its GDP knocked off track by not reaching an agreement. It's not for us to say how it would be resolved, but it would be a catastrophe. There is a significant risk that at some point in the first 2 weeks of June, the government will no longer be able to pay all of its obligations. See, it's going to have a cascade effect. Now, here's the real story. The story beneath the story. Jamie Dimon, the head of Chase, JP Morgan Chase, is warning about something completely different. Just the idea of moving that close to a default date is going to send shockwaves through the markets. Not even if they have a last minute resolution. Just the idea that this could happen, that you could get this close, is going to cause all sorts of problems. You see, it's the idea of having a putting something very, very important way too close to the edge of a cliff. You have to put in guardrails. You have to make decisions differently. Now, hang on to that thought for 1 minute. When the money stops rolling in, it's got to come from somewhere. It's got to come from somewhere. There's going to have to be some new engine that's going to start generating that cash again. Because people are going to have to eat. Why? Not so much because people will starve, but because the people they buy the food from need the money, and their suppliers need the money, and everybody down the chain from them needs the money. See, that's kind of the idea of money having its own inherent value is kind of ridiculous. It's only a medium that transmutes value of other things. That's all it does. It takes the value of work and effort and then transmutes it into the things that we need. But in and of itself, it doesn't have value. 2/3 of people now receive monthly benefit checks. 2/3 in America. It kind of defeats the argument of living in a capitalist country, doesn't it? 2/3. I mean, I'm not sure how you wrap your mind around the idea that when government checks stop going out, that it collapses society, if society isn't already socialist. Has been this way for a long time. Now, here's where things get a little bit weird, and it's going to really mess with your mind. Remember where they went to Beirut, the building? You see, the entire world has washed its hands of the Western Hemisphere. Because basically the idea is this: Canada, the United States, Mexico, Central America, South America accounts for about 1.2, 1.3 billion people out of 8 billion people. That means the other 6.8 billion live over here. Africa has a mean age of 19, and by 2050, 1 in 4 people living in the world will be African. That's right. In only 27 short years, 1 in 4 people in this country, in the world, will be African. And they'll be young, and they will be worker age. If they're 19, if the mean age is 19 now, the mean age isn't going to go up that much in Africa between now and then. They will be the young worker age. The young workers that work for next to nothing. Now, here's the United States. Here's what the AI has told the government and why they should leave North America. Mount Rainier could blow anytime, cause massive devastation. Yellowstone, out in Wyoming, could blow, make virtually everything east of it uninhabitable. The San Andreas Fault could let go at any time and destroy everything from San Francisco to San Diego. Rebuilding it would cost hundreds of billions of dollars. The New Madrid in the middle of the Midwest could let go, making the Mississippi River impassable for a decade because of all of the stuff, all of the bridges that would collapse into it. It would make transiting the country almost impossible. And then you have Hurricane Alley. The billions and billions of dollars spent every year picking back up from when hurricanes come and go. You add all of this up, you pump this into an AI, and the AI says this is not tenable. You add in the debt. You add in how many people are living off the government. You add in the risk of major natural disasters and the natural disasters that occur every single year simply because of the hurricanes. It doesn't make any sense. It's going to fail eventually. There'll be a cascade effect. And the idea, especially over here with the San Andreas, for the amount of money it would take to rebuild San Francisco to San Diego, those basically 3 or 4 major cities, San Francisco, San Jose, LA, and San Diego, you could build 50 cities from the ground up in Africa. That would be far more future ready, so to speak, according to them. Why? The land is cheaper. The work is cheaper. And you could stand them up and have them be far more productive much sooner. I mean, everything about it would be cheaper. And in 27 years, 1 in 4 worker persons, worker age persons, are going to live here and be here. North America is no longer a tenable from a computer standpoint. See, computers don't have nostalgia. Computers don't have loyalty. They just pump in the numbers. And they say, this isn't tenable. The risk, you've got 2 major volcano risks, 2 major fault risks, and an annual risk with the hurricanes that just makes the money situation just not worth it. So they picked up and they left. So make no mistake, this is the future that the AI is planning for. Now, I know these images probably disturb a lot of people. There's been a lot of talk about this amongst certain circles that aren't really welcome on YouTube. And basically because of some of the language that was used, I can understand why, but it is the reality. But I want you to think about something very, very critically. You see, that is exactly what we did, the Europeans did to the Native Americans. Cultural genocide. There are no true, full-blooded Native Americans left in enough quantity that they could ever rebuild the culture that was here when we arrived back in the 1500s. We meaning Europeans. They were culturally bred out of existence. It was a form of genocide. It took hundreds of years, but that was the case. There are some people out there with Native American blood. I'm actually one of those people, by the way. Way, way back in history. But I think there is a secondary, more spiritual meaning to the scripture that says, he who shall live by his sword, giant air quotes there, shall die by it. And this, I don't know how you can miss this. It's not going to happen today. It's not going to happen tomorrow or next week, but it's going to happen. And it's happening. The entire globe is changing. There are those that have wanted to rise up and resist against this. You know, you can have whatever opinion you want about this. You can be upset about it, get emotional about it, get offended at it. It's just the case. By 2050, a quarter of the world's people will be African, and they won't be old. That's the other thing, too. America's population, North America especially, the population is aging. The population is getting especially in Florida, getting much, much older than can be dealt with. It's the baby boomer thing. It's not the productive age, the productive cheap labor age of 19, 20, 21, 22. I mean, if you had a business and you had a place where you could pay people 20, 30, 40% less to do the same job, why wouldn't you? And if you could take your business and move it away from the edge of a cliff, would you? Of course you would. Well, America, North America, is the giant edge of a cliff. Every year, slammed with multiple hurricanes. Every year. One giant supervolcano ready to annihilate the entire continent. A minor volcano, Rainier, and 2 huge fault lines. New Madrid and San Andreas. You ever wonder why you don't hear about earthquakes in Africa? You don't hear about volcanoes in Africa? You don't hear about giant hurricanes slamming into Africa? Go look that up. It's very clear why they went to Lebanon. It's going to be the new center of the world. I know this is a very controversial statement to make, but when you sit back and think about it clinically, it all makes sense. And it all jives with Scripture, too. Just not in the way a lot of people thought. So, anyway, I will leave it there. I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of comments on this one, but it is what it is. And you can just face reality and deal with it going forward, or you can shove your head in the sand, one of the two. Pray for each other. Lift each other up. God bless. Like, share, subscribe, and we'll see you guys next time.